I was born blind. There's no way to describe what I see. I don't see anything. It's not darkness, it's just nothing. I make do, though. With the right assistive technology, I can function more or less. I can get around my apartment just fine. I know my way around the parts of town I'm familiar with, and I can get to and from work just fine. I can use a computer with a braille display. I can use my phone. I'm able to type this, although I fear that typing this may be the very last thing I do. I was at home when I saw the man for the first time. I don't know when he got there, I just remember turning and pausing when I saw something. I stared at him, silent and trying to make sense of what I was looking at, and the fact that I was looking at something at all. It took me a few moments to realize that I was looking at what looked like another human being. He wore what I assumed was a suit and hat. He stood amongst the nothingness I normally saw, as though he was completely at home there, and he stared off into the distance as if he was looking at something else entirely. Then his head turned and he looked at me. His lips curled upwards in a pleasant smile. Then he winked at me, as if he knew I could see him. I stood still, unsure how to process any of what I was seeing, and unsure how to react as he turned and walked away. He didn't disappear. No, he just got further and further away from me. Staring at him, it almost completely disoriented me, and I needed to reorient myself in my own living room. I found my sofa and sat down in it, my legs feeling weak like jelly. I watched as the man got further and further away from me, gradually going about his business and doing whatever it was that he was doing. My heart raced in my chest. I had no idea how to process any of this. I had no idea what to think. The shock of it was overwhelming. I focused on him, drinking in every detail and trying to reconcile it with what I knew about the world I couldn't see. I determined that he was wearing either a gray or black suit. Probably gray. He was Caucasian with dark hair. I couldn't determine his age, although someone else might have been able to do so. I find it difficult to describe his facial features, although I blame that more on the fact that this was the first face I'd ever seen. Over the next few days, the man remained. He seemed so far away from me, and as far as I could tell, he never really paid me any mind. I would watch him from time to time, curious as to what he was or if he was real. He seemed real, but at the same time I knew he might just be a figment of my imagination, something I'd made up as an approximation of what a person actually looked like. But as I watched him in the distance, it didn't seem like a figment of my imagination. I saw him move around a world I couldn't see. He sat at invisible tables. He conversed with invisible people. And he went about his own business. When I was on a higher floor in a building, I saw his position shift relative to mine. He'd sink lower and grow further away, but he was still there. Likewise, sometimes I saw him move higher up, relative to my position, as if he was in another building, doing whatever it was he did in his day-to-day activities. Every now and then, he would look at me. Usually I was too far away to make out his facial expression, but I knew he was smiling. A few times, I even saw him raise his hand in a polite wave. Sometimes I saw him stare off into the distance, as if he were looking at someone else just like me. Were there other people who saw him? People like me, perhaps? I never mentioned the man to anyone else. I figured they'd think I was either joking or hallucinating. That didn't stop me from doing research, though. Like I said before, with the right assistive technology, I can function just fine. I searched the internet to no avail. My screen reader read off a few posts on subreddits for the blind, and a few other forums off Reddit, but none of it was even remotely relevant. I posted in a couple of groups asking outright if anyone had ever heard of this, hoping that someone would be able to give me an explanation. I didn't get much of a response. People thought I was either trying to be a troll or outright crazy. I actually started wondering if maybe that was the answer after all. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe this is just what blind people saw when they lost their minds. God, I wish I was just crazy. I'd been at work when I looked over to see what the man was up to. In my head, I'd started thinking of him as the Visible Man, my own dumb little pun on the Invisible Man. He was close to me that day, probably not more than a few blocks away from my current location. I worked in a high-rise, and I could see him down below on the streets, walking without a care in the world. He always seemed to wear the same suit. He never seemed to change. I suppose that was one mark in favor of me being completely insane. Still, I watched him weave through the streets, and it wasn't long before I noticed a second person up ahead of him. This clearly wasn't the same person. Their clothes were different. Their hair was different. I couldn't make out the fine details, but I knew that the colors of their clothes were bright and vibrant. Even at a distance, I was transfixed by them. I felt myself leaning closer, watching as the Visible Man approached this new stranger from behind. The stranger looked like they were smoking a cigarette, and they paid no mind that the Visible Man was coming up behind them. Not until he was right on top of them. I knew what a murder was, and I realized what was happening almost immediately. "No!" I remember crying out as I saw the Visible Man seize the stranger from behind. He violently twisted his head to the side, and I could have sworn that, even as far away as I was, I could still hear the crack of bone. The stranger screamed as the Visible Man dragged them off, out of sight of whoever might be watching. I watched in horror as the stranger weakly tried to struggle while the Visible Man sank his fingers into their flesh and began to pull him apart. I couldn't help myself. I screamed. My hands covered my mouth. I could hear the snap of bone, muscle, and tendons. I could hear the sudden cessation of the screams from the stranger. I saw his dark red blood that drenched the hands of the Visible Man and stained his suit. The stranger's death was quick, although not mercifully so. His final moments had been filled with a suffering I could not comprehend. With blood splattered across his face, the Visible Man looked over at me. I saw a wide, toothy grin on his face as he looked right at me. Not in my direction. At me. "Emma?" A hand rested on my shoulder. I recognized the voice as one belonging to a friend, Susan Sanders. She'd always been good to me ever since I got that job. "Emma, what's wrong?" I tried to speak. I couldn't find the words. All I could do was senselessly babble. He killed him. He killed him. He killed him. Tears were streaming down my cheeks. I could hear others around me, no doubt concerned. Oh God, I was making a scene in front of the entire office. "Give her some space." Susan knelt down in front of me. "What happened? Are you all right?" Her voice was calm, yet concerned. I looked in the direction of the corpse, but I saw nothing. Like it had never been. I could still see the Visible Man, though. I could still see the blood on him. He was still looking at me. And he was still grinning. I went home for the day. I told people I was sick. The Visible Man kept his distance from me, but I still saw him. I watched as he cleaned himself up. He licked the blood off his fingers like a cat. Occasionally, his eyes would dart over towards me, and I tried to convince myself that I was crazy. That this was all some figment of my imagination. Maybe it was. I knew there was really only one way to be sure. I kept a metaphorical eye on the local news, listening for any reports of a murderer in my city. I lived in Hamilton, a good distance outside Toronto, and while Hamilton isn't exactly known for its shockingly low crime rate, I still figured that I might at least be able to pick out the murder I'd heard about from any other noise. If there were no corpses recovered, then I was clearly imagining everything. The Visible Man wasn't real, and I needed to seek mental help immediately. I'd rather have been on pills and in therapy than hunted by that thing. If there was a body, though, I didn't know what I'd do. Run, perhaps, if there was anywhere I could even run to. The Visible Man could see me. I knew that to be an indisputable fact, and I could see him, too. Even if I ran, he could have chased me. The Visible Man had retreated until he was barely a speck in the distance, yet I could still see him in some capacity. I recognized the tiny pinprick that was him, retreated to whatever place he called home. At the very least, he wasn't after me for the moment. It hardly did anything for my nerves, but at least I knew he wasn't going to come for me immediately. I didn't find any news regarding any mysterious deaths until later that evening. I listened quietly as my screen reader read off a news report on one of the crimes. There had been a murder near my work that day. The details were scarce, but there was only one that I needed to know. The victim had been a blind man. It was almost a day later that I worked up the nerve to talk to Susan. The visible man wasn't back yet, but I knew he was coming. He was still a speck on the horizon that posed an unspoken threat. I constantly glanced at him, making sure he wasn't getting any closer to me. He was far enough away that I couldn't clearly make out any of what he was doing. Susan came to see me after work. She had a key to my apartment and let herself in, calling out for me once she was there to let me know it was her. "Emma?" "I'm here," I replied. I'd put on the kettle so that we could have some tea. Susan liked green tea. Green tea was in the third tin on my counter. I recognized the smell as soon as I opened it. "How are you holding up?" Susan asked. She sounded close. She'd probably made it to the kitchen. "Like shit," I replied. I felt her taking the kettle from my hands to finish fixing the tea for me. "Still stubborn as hell, though. I've been worried about you. What happened the other day? You just freaked out." She pushed a teacup towards me. I gripped it tightly and let Susan lead me to my couch. "I don't know, it's just..." I paused, not sure where to start. I waited until I was sat down comfortably before I even tried. I'm seeing someone," I said after a while. "What, like a man?" I grimaced. "Not in the way you're thinking," I said. "I saw him, Susan. Like you see me right now." Susan was silent, but it was hard to stop myself from continuing. "Usually it's just nothing. There's nothing there. But then, there he was. I didn't know who he was. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever seen him. It was the first time I'd seen anyone, considering, well, you know. But he was there, Susan. And he saw me too. He looked at me. He looked right at me and he waved. He fucking waved." Susan maintained her silence, but I knew she was listening. I could hear her breathing. I felt like I was about to break down into tears again. "He's been there every day. Way off in the distance. Then the other day, there was this other man. An older man in a colorful shirt. I saw him come up behind him and he killed him." "Emma, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm fucking sure." My words came out harsher than I'd intended them to. "I looked at the news, Susan. A man died on that day, and he was a blind man. Blind like me. I don't know what happened to him, or what that man I saw wants, or what he is, or why I can see him, but I know he's real, and I know I'm not crazy, and I'm scared." The tears had started falling now, and Susan moved to my side, wrapping her arms around me. "Shh, it's okay, it's okay." "No," I rasped. "No, it's not. I read the news. It was a blind man. He was in his 60s. His name was Daniel Watson, and you were there when I saw him die." Susan went quiet. I knew she remembered my little freakout from a few days prior. I could imagine her trying to digest everything I just told her. Her grip on me had gotten weaker. "Oh, God," she said after a few moments. "You really did see something, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "I saw him kill that man. And I think he's going to come after me. I think he was trying to taunt me." "Do you see him now?" Susan asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes, he's far away. He's been far away for a few days. I always see him now, if he's close or far away. He's there. He's like a speck right now, but I still see him amongst the nothingness." I raised a hand and pointed towards the distant speck. "There," I said. I heard a shift of movement as Susan looked in the direction I'd pointed. She was silent for a few moments. "That's off towards Toronto," she said after a while. She fell silent before sighing. "Jesus, Emma. I don't know what to do or what to say or just how to react to this. I've been trying to figure out what to do for a while now," I replied. "I don't know either. Run, hide, I don't know." "What if we call the cops?" she asked. "We could tell them everything you told me. Maybe you could give them a description of the guy or something." "Maybe," I said after a few moments, although I'm not sure if what I could tell them would be helpful in the slightest. "We could go after him, get the cops. We could drive up to him and they could arrest him or something." No, I'm not going to go near him," I said. "After what he did? I saw him tear that man in half with his bare hands. I'm not getting close to that. I'm not putting someone else close to that. Hell no." Okay, calm down," Susan said. "We won't go looking for him. But if you're right, then the police need to know." She wasn't wrong about that. "All right," I said after a few moments. "We can call them. But we aren't going near that man." Susan helped me speak to the police. The officer I talked to was nice, although I could tell from the tone in his voice that he didn't believe me. Still, I told him everything I knew from the start, and when it was done, Susan took me back to my place. "You did good," she said. "Hopefully they'll find him and maybe they'll be able to stop him." I wasn't sure I believed that. I asked Susan to stay the night. I wasn't entirely comfortable being alone. The visible man was still just a speck in the distance, but I knew that if he wanted to, he could come back for me at any time, and I didn't know if there was anything I could do to stop him. Having Susan around did make me feel better, though. She ordered takeout for us, and as we waited, we talked as if nothing was outright wrong. It was nice to have a bit of normalcy return to my life, to dull the anxious fear that gripped me tightly. I had planned on going to bed after we ate. The day had taken a lot out of me emotionally, and I wanted to sleep more than anything else. While Susan was out picking up the takeout, I went to the bathroom for a quick shower. Showering before bed was part of my evening routine. I figured I could have my pajamas on for when she came back. Then maybe I could make up the couch for her to sleep on. I'd offered to sleep there myself and give Susan the bed, but she'd declined. Alone in the bathroom, I took my time getting undressed. My clothes were set down where I could find them later, and I ran the water so it would heat up. The warm water on my skin helped wash away the stress from that day. I let it run over my face before I started to wash my hair. My mood had gotten better. I had even begun to wonder if maybe Susan was right. Maybe the police would find something that could identify the visible man. Maybe they'd do something to stop him. Almost out of habit, I glanced in the direction of the visible man once again. I didn't see that distant speck anymore. Frowning, I looked around for any trace of him. Instead, I saw a woman. She was tall, with long legs and curly brown hair. She was pretty, and I felt a little bit mesmerized by her. She was carrying brown paper bags in her arms, and had a pleasant smile. She was a few blocks away from me, and it took me a moment to realize that this must have been Susan. I'd never actually seen her before, but I couldn't help but think that she was pretty. But as I stared at her, I felt a sudden, sinking horror blossoming deep in my stomach. I had only seen two people before her. The visible man and the man who he'd killed in the moments before his death. He was there, behind Susan. He kept a steady pace, rapidly catching up to her. He was going to reach her in just a matter of seconds. No! Before I knew what I was doing, I had pushed myself out of the shower. My feet slipped on the floor of the bathroom, and I felt the familiar pain of falling. I was disoriented. I didn't know what was what to grab, and I didn't have the time to figure it out. "No!" I cried, as if one of them could hear me. "No, don't! Not her! Please don't! Not her! Please!" The visible man looked at me, wearing that familiar smile. His eyes seemed to twinkle. He was just a few steps behind Susan now, and she turned to look at him. No. Tears streamed from my eyes as I crawled along the bathroom floor, hoping I could somehow stop him, hoping I could save her. Please, don't. Please. He moved almost too fast for me to see. In one swift motion, he'd snatched Susan up by the neck and slammed her against something. The bags dropped from her hands. I could hear the pained and startled yelp that escaped her. No, 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 no. The Visible Man was grinning as he plunged his hand into Susan's stomach. She screamed. I could hear her. I watched as he tore something out of her. Bloody ropes that I realized were her entrails. Susan screamed. I could hear it from where I lay. She struggled. She tried to push the man off of her, but she couldn't overpower him. She was only human, but he was something else entirely. He tore the lower part of her body away with almost no effort. I could see urine running down Susan's no longer attached legs. Her lower half was carelessly tossed aside. Susan looked so impossibly pale. Her eyes darted around rapidly. Her mouth opened and closed. She was dying. Oh God, she was dying. He let Susan's top half fall. She landed in a heap on the ground, either dying or already dead. No. The word only barely came out as a whimper. The Visible Man turned to look at me, grinning from ear to ear as he did. He licked Susan's blood from his hand, never once taking his eyes off of me. I could almost hear his sadistic laughter before he turned and walked away. He will come for me next. I've done everything I can do. I've spoken to the police again. I've posted on forums. I'm out of options. I saw him earlier today, walking towards me with that twisted grin of his. I know he is on his way to kill me, and I don't think there is anything I can do to stop him. There's nowhere I can hide. He sees me no matter where I go. He's not far now. Less than a block away. I don't think I have more than a few minutes left. Please. Please, if you're reading this, my name is Emma Goldsmith, and I need your help. He's coming for me. Please. I don't want to die. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.